to discuss anything and everything on those issues. Okay, so if you haven't caught those issues, get on them. Okay, you're isolated. Do some reading. I love issue 4 because I found the cover intricate. When I first saw it, I thought, oh, it's Venom. You know, the deal with that blackness, like oozing out of He-Man. And I was trying to understand what that meaning was because I know you were heading toward Filmation, and all the other covers had a hint of what we had. And I knew this is kind of the He-Man Filmation, the way his design was. But what was the idea behind that black ooze?
I have no idea. That was a weird choice. I don't know. It was the artist, the cover is a dude in Yakuli, I believe, and he's real talented. But I never see them until they're done, you know? So, like, when I got that one, I was like, oh, okay, I guess. Because, one, it doesn't look like the animated He-Man because it's done in his style. So, kind of, you know, it doesn't really sell the idea that we're doing the animated He-Man. Like, if it was all a bunch of realistic stuff and then animated He-Man, I thought that would have been cool, but I don't know why. But, yeah, I'm not sure what the Venom thing is at all. Maybe it was just the editor's son of script, and that's how he interpreted the sort of anti-Eternia corruption, I guess, is how he interpreted it, which is totally fine. But yeah, everybody thought Venom, which I don't know, maybe it helps us sell issues. Venom is unreasonably popular at the moment for whatever reason. Right. So
because we saw that cover before, and that's why I was like, okay, what's going? You know, I was thinking like maybe anti-Eternia was going to shed his skin or something. You know, that's kind of where I thought the story was. Okay, and now that you said you had no idea, okay.
Yeah, I never know what's going on with the covers. It's because Mattel coordinates them, so like I tend to not really know. You know, sometimes when I'm working on books, I have a lot more interaction with the cover artists and stuff, but these are pretty much done by Mattel. So, and he's super good. That artist is really, really good. We don't have a direct line of communication, so he kind of interprets things however he interprets them.
Well, and it's interesting because I feel like there's this kind of this tradition of comic book covers that have nothing to do with what the content of the actual comic has to offer, right? And so I feel like it's not totally unusual.
It's not quite representative, but it's close. I mean, it's symbolic, I guess, because that something like that happens. But comic covers are supposed to just be like, analogies or metaphors, and they're just supposed to get you to buy the comic. Really, that's right. The job. So for me, I was like, "Yep, sounds fine."
You could have just had like a really nice looking Tila, and be like, "Okay, sure, I'll buy it."
Yeah, a nice Tila would have been nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was kind of bummed she's not on. I don't think she's on. Well, she's on 6, but a version of.
We need a variant cover.
So another clue right there. One thing I wanted to ask you, because right off the bat, I love, like, you take us to Eternia, the Filmation. I like the art style. You know, it is a little bit of a mix. And I was worried that you were going to make fun of it, because when you go to the 80s now and you see Filmation, people still kind of talk about how hokey it was and, and all that. And you didn't make fun of it.
No, I mean, I tried not to make fun of anything. I mean, it should be fun, but I try to not make fun of anything because all this stuff it's consistent into its own rules. So, the only thing I kind of made fun of is crackers, but that's
yeah.
Well, I kind of felt you were heading there with the lessons. You were kind of pointing out, or the movie He-Man was pointing out that they're all about lessons and all that. They don't know, that he kind of pointed out that they're naives about it.
So, yeah. To him, yeah.
And I did like that. I did like, because it kind of was, that Filmation world is, but then you really made a hero.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's for kids. I mean, it's a cartoon for kids, and it was always meant to be that. And it was from a time, like, if you think about the stuff Filmation had to deal with when they were making that cartoon, and, you've got like Nancy Reagan, requiring, these anti-drug PSAs and stuff, so they were working within a sort of structure of the government while essentially doing something that hadn't been done previously, which was do a kids cartoon that was ostensibly an ad for toys. So, they were trying to kind of appease old Nancy, but they were also trying to do, relevant stories that felt they had drama and they had good characters, and they did all this stuff, and they did it amazingly well. Like, if you look, how well that cartoon stands up, and I would suggest that, Filmation Skeletor is probably the most iconic thing from He-Man, period. I think he's
Yeah.
probably more famous than He-Man, and he's certainly more famous than any other version of Skeletor. And he's just like a pure creation. Like everybody, from my 7-year-old niece to my 65-year-old mom knows Filmation Skeletor.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to chime in and say that, as far as not making fun of the show, I mean, this is Tim Seeley we're talking about. He's a hardcore Masters of the Universe fan like us. So I had no concerns about that going into into reading these issues. And I feel that here's a He-Man from a much darker multiverse, from the movies version of the show, of the canon, and he's in stark contrast to the more innocent Filmation multiverse. And so he's giving that, he's looking at that world through his eyes, and I feel like that piece of it was done very, very well.
And in the end, of course, Earth movie He-Man was basically proven wrong, right? Because he kvetched about the lessons, but in the end, it's what saved his ass. So
yeah.
Well, that's that's the praise I give you for that, because you brought it around.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
This is the idea that the documentaries, the He-Man documentaries, and a lot of the people praise is that as much as people looked on it and laughed about it, because it's 80s. The lessons and all that resonated, and now people are appreciating how much Filmation brought it. And that's what I'm trying to say. I give you credit for that, because I was remembering when I was looking at this, I was remembering way back in the 90s, there was a Justice League issue where the Justice League met the Super Friends, and they kind of made fun of that for a while. It was like a crossover hyper time issue and all that. And they did make fun of the Super Friends, but I always felt that was a bit unfair, because those were as a kid, that's what I grew up in. I didn't read the comic books. I saw the cartoons first.
Right.
And you respected it. You didn't do the route they did. You respected the Filmation. And what I appreciated is that you made Filmation He-Man or Prince Adam the main hero by pulling through and doing good. And I give you high praise for that.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, but the thing I was trying to not do, so the easy thing would have been to make fun of it or make it grim and dark. And like, I always remember there was this DC series where they brought in Wendy and Marvin, who were like the kids from the pre-Super Friends show, the Super Friends, not the Super Power show. They were from, and then like they had a dog, and then in the comics they like had the dog grow giant and tear Wendy's arm off or something like that. Like,
oh my god,
which is, it's like all of it is for shock, right? It's basically like so jaded and so depressing, like that you're basically saying like my imagination and childhood is so dead that all I can do for enjoyment is destroy the things I used to love. Like that to me is crap. Like that's just bad writing. So so I didn't want to do something like that. Like,
nice.
So hopefully, we have our laughs and we try to do things in the tone, and hopefully the humor comes from the contrast between those characters, because obviously, like, the the just brightness of that Orko would drive movie He-Man crazy, and all that sort of stuff. That's just in character, but like, But again, we did do something terrible to Crackers the Clown, so I'm not. We didn't show it. So.
Well, thank you so much for sparing Filmation He-Man and of course Prince Adam. Yeah. And we got to see I just wanted to mention, you can actually see the sword sheath behind the back of Prince Adam for the very first time ever.
Oh yeah, yeah. We had some designs that we used, and that's what Tom was drawing from. So he had that sort of. I don't remember what style, but we had something from Mattel that we were using.
Just wanted to throw in there. I was really happy issue 3 was issue 3, number 1 for me. We have He-Man reestablished in the Mike Young Productions again. That made me happy, because with all the He-Man alternates getting killed off, I was scared to death through that entire issue. So thank you. I'm very happy with how that one worked out. Going into issue 4, it was interesting that I'd say probably more people than not wanted to see Filmation He-Man go toe-to-toe with anti-Eternia He-Man. And it was really, like a surprise, and it was also kind of a nice surprise in some ways to see it wasn't Filmation He-Man going toe-to-toe with him. We got to see Dolph go toe-to-toe, which was really cool. But
Yeah,
it was
so
interesting
cool.
that Adam got to play the hero in this
Yeah.
issue instead of He-Man. And what was your thoughts on flipping the script in a sense to let Adam have his time to shine versus I'm positive every fan had to go, it's going to be Filmation. He's going to take charge. He's going to kick some butt. And that's like, Adam's going to kick in and kick some butt and take charge. What was your thinking on making that work in this miniseries?
I mean, well, one of the things, I guess maybe just this sort of consistent thing across all the Masters of the Universe stuff is you see, and it's this sort of weird backlash against like Clark Kent being Superman, and this like older jaded audience going like, oh, anybody would know that that's fucking Clark Kent. And then so the same reaction kind of happens for Prince Adam, and people like, and I feel like this has been my sort of gist the entire time, because it was also sort of the point of Injustice Masters of the Universe, which is just like, you know, those characters need that human identity because it keeps them human, right? Like that's why. And so, you know, so here we had seen previously that 87 movie He-Man basically said, you know, he didn't need to be Prince Adam anymore. Once the war started, there was no need for secret identity. There was nothing. And so he'd given it up. And so you kind of saw him. That's part of why his anger and his sort of complete envelopment into being He-Man had made him vulnerable more so than Adam was to the Starseed. And we already knew that, you know, because of the cartoon, Adam had been able to turn down the Starseed's power and corruption. Yeah. And then, you know, seeing that this He-Man who had given up his human side to some degree, and kind of had stuck to being this sort of space god, space warrior, laser gun god, was more susceptible. And then Adam was the one that was able to pull him out. So it's sort of like all about this sort of larger treatise that I've been approaching all this stuff with, which I think partially is just stop adding your adult logic to this thing, you know, and like just try to enjoy this thing for what it is.
Yeah.
And also just sort of this idea that I think there's this weird tendency, I feel like, to try to make superheroes like, you know, more realistic or something, which is like the antithesis of what makes a superhero interesting. Like the more realistic they get, the more that the cracks show. And, you know, to me, that's so unnecessary and so adult and jaded, you know, like, I don't know. It's just like this backlash for me for, you know, something like the Joker movie where like, we're going to make a Joker story, but it's not going to be a comic book story. It's like, yeah, that's why that movie's terrible. Like you didn't make a comic book story. You made a off, you know, Scorsese movie without the heart. Like it's just, that's the, you know, so that's kind of my large treatise, I think. And you'll see, I don't know, I can't stop myself from putting in my opinions as story. It's just how it works. So there you go.
Well, it comes with, I mean, you know, you put everything you have into it. And so that's just, you know, natural, right? You're putting parts of you into it. Yeah.
And, you know, obviously there are probably people who could do a Master Universe story and not treat it as personal as me, but you didn't get that person, you got me. So
well, and I'm super happy that we got you, really, because I mean, it's not just somebody who is like, oh, you're assigned this, you know, write something about this brand you've never heard of. No, it's somebody who's, you know, been on He-Man.org since I think you said 2009, you know, and somebody who
1999.
Oh wait, did I say right?
Yeah,
right,
he's one of the originals.
Yeah. That's right. Which is fantastic. You love He-Man and Masters of the Universe like we do, and that says a lot, you know. So thank you for being a part of this. And but yeah, oh my gosh, I love the fact that Filmation Skeletor's part in this issue was amazing, and I love that there's so much action. I appreciate that there's a lot of action. There's a lot of fists are flying, bodies are flying around. You know, that is so cool. But what ends up happening with Skeletor, magic. I love it.
The only my regret is I didn't have more room for, because you know, that's one thing about this, that you know, I only get 20 pages an issue, so I'm only in these places for like 15 pages or 16 pages because I have to set it up and I have to close it out. So like, you know, I would have loved to spend more time with Filmation Skeletor because he's such an icon. So the job then instead had to be to construct something for him that was so perfectly iconic and so obvious that I didn't have to spend a lot of time setting it up. You would just go, yeah, that's what he would do. And so, for him to have a chance to have the Starseed, like, he wouldn't think about it for a second, but then knowing he'd have a boss, I mean, he would never let that happen. So that was just like, the solution to only having a few pages with him was to just make it 100% a character study.
And that's why you're good at this, because you understood skeleton. Like you mentioned before, if somebody else came aboard, they would have missed that. Some other characters, if you do a villain who gets offered power, they would have grabbed at it. You knew that Skeletor wants to be master. That's his motivation. Yeah. And you understood that.
Think of how he treats sidekicks. Like, anybody who's not the boss, he thinks is the biggest piece, right? Like, so if he was not the boss, he thinks he would be like, oh, I should be able to get kicked around and zapped in the ass. Like, he knows anybody who's not the boss is the worst. That's how he thinks.
Yeah.
Well, now that you brought it up, that you were limited, I'm just curious, what would you have done if you had more pages?
I mean, I definitely would just give him more screen time and would have more stuff with them arriving at Snake Mountain and his reaction to it, and then having him deal, with Prince Adam and that there's like two other He-Man basically around, and a version of himself. I would have played with a lot more, like, especially, this is the hardest thing about this book, was always having to be like a version of yourself shows up and you just go, what? The way we found out was they live in a place that's crazy, so the rules are different. So, like, if an alternate Skeletor shows up, most of the Skeletors are like, yeah, I know who you are. They get it. I had to sort of say that, like, well, look, they've been studying all these Skeletors and studying magic and stuff for many years, so they would totally have this stuff, like,
like a cosmic awareness.
Yeah, totally. So, but I would have loved this, but then I can't do that every issue. Every issue I can't have and be like, hey, I'm you, and then they'd be like, what? Like, I just can't do it.
Makes sense.
Based on the page counts and stuff like that, it sounds like maybe there's more to most of these issues than you were able to put on the page because you had some other ideas, and maybe it's that whole you have to kill your children thing with writing or whatever. There might be some things that maybe you had to leave behind and stuff like that. Is there a potential, if this they've collected all the other miniseries to this point, if they collect it and then maybe have some of your story notes of things that we didn't get to see at some point, is that a potential maybe, or is it kind of it is what it is? We're just going to showcase that.
I mean, I would love to do that.
It's every issue I've read, I feel like you've gotten so much into each issue that it's chock full, but I always feel like there probably is something that you left on your page that couldn't go into these pages due to your limitation with the page counts. Yeah. So like in the He-Man and the Thundercats crossover, I know they had a lot of room in the back where they could showcase Freddie Williams' art, maybe have some notes. That would be something I'd really be curious about, because I think out of anybody working on this, you probably now, after 5 issues, I'm looking at it going, there has to be a ton of stuff that you wished you could have put into this thing, and you're giving nods to the things that you'd love to put in, but that page count is probably the thing that's driving you crazy each month. Going, I really want to add this in, but I gotta time constraints, pacing constraints.
I mean, I easily could have done 12. That's the thing. I would have loved to have had the room like Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's the room I wish I had.
Yeah.
12 issues, and then I would have had them add more characters. Like, it wouldn't have just been, the 2 or 3 guys jumping in through time. I would have had multiple characters, and I would have, I mean, if I could have, that's what I would have done, but there was no way to get 12 issues out of it. So,
yeah,
if I had a chance, that's what I would.
I have been curious about that ever since reading the first issue. So now it's like I like knowing that there were some ideas that didn't make it. I'd love to at least hear like a director's commentary or something in some future edition of it where it's collected and just go like, that would have been so cool. I mean, how often is it in movies we get the director really would love to do this, and you're like, that would have been an interesting story just to have that little moment. I
mean, I really want to do something with Orko, Filmation Orko. And then I want to do a thing with Evil Orko from the DC comics. And I had a whole subplot that I was going to do with that. And I had to cut it. And I had a lot more Tila stuff because she's my favorite. And so I was going to do more with Tila. But I didn't have room. I had to cut it off.
I'm telling you, you need to pitch a Tales from the Multiverse comic.
Yeah.
I agree.
It worked out nice. Rob David himself was like really good about basically saying like, okay, because I had pitched him just a bunch of crazy, all kinds. I had like a planet that they go to, which was all the knockoff He-Mans. It was going to be like Platino from Where's the Tea, and it was going to be like, like these like Mexican knockoff characters, and it was going to be like all those guys. And Rob was like, hey, that's creative, but nobody cares about that. Like, cut that. Like, Rob was really good at sort of focusing on the important stuff. And he's the one that kind of said, he picked out like the elements of the script and said, these are the things that people are going to care about, and that's the stuff that we focused on.
Because it does get too obscure.
Well, I was pointing out that's part of the dynamic I'm picking up here was the character. And as I'm reading them, like I really like Tila in the 2000X universe. We really got to see her. There was a connection there, with the app He-Man saying, how he felt about her. I really thought there'd be development. And I know you ran out of space. I know you ran out of space. I would have liked to have seen an underlying theme of He-Man with Tila's relationships and Skeletor's relationships.
Like the way I had to set it up was, this is just like an education about this sort of thing, is that I knew the themes that I wanted to hit, which was He-Man always has a weakness for Tila. That's true of all the stories. So we get to see that, and it pays off this issue, right? Like, because that's how they convince the Savage He-Man to come with that. Or in issue 5, it pays off. Because that's how they get him to come along, is that Keldor has learned that He-Man's always have a weakness for Tila. So he uses it. Like, so I can make it work. I can make it pay off, but I don't get to play it like, I mean, obviously I would love to have been able to do something with She-Ra, although that sort of opens a whole new can of worms. And, like I would have loved to have done stuff with that. I kind of wanted to do like a heroic faker world. Like I want to do all this, and, it's just, I only have so much room. And definitely like Rob saying, look, these are the important ones that people really care about. And I think the way I pitched it, the sort of prime world is that original mini comics world, and we're moving towards that world as being sort of like this big story point. And then when we end the story back on Anti-Eternia, like that was the trajectory we all felt like it has to be this.
I think an epic storytelling usually have or in the Hero of a Thousand Faces, they have it where we always end up where we started. You know?
Having been changed, right?
Yeah.
You go, change, experience, come, return, change. That's I teach a class, so I know this side and down. But definitely like, and that's obviously the Master Universe formula has always been that too. And it's certainly, he's a Campbellian hero for sure. But you don't want to ruin that. Like that's something so important and inherent to the character. Like I don't feel the need to like upend that or destroy it.
Well, before we go on to the issue 5, I want to ask one question on this. On Filmation in that universe, you've kind of matured the language a bit. Like you said earlier, It was for kids. And here, when I was reading it, I found it really powerful that you brought up like Adam with hangovers, the hangover excuse. You had that line. You had Adam mentioning that, the orb, it's like a drug addict, it'll draw to Skeletor, which are mature themes, which would never come out on Filmation. They might on the series today. Was that a conscious effort to put that sort of tone in?
I mean, it was a weird line to walk, because I knew if I made it too I knew it had to feel like authentic and sort of pure and honest, and the voice had to sound right. But I also couldn't make it like I couldn't underplay the drama, right? Like I couldn't cheat the stakes. So, which is the hard thing about this sort of stuff, because if you lower the stakes, then the audience checks out, So like the stakes had to remain high, and we have to understand the stakes and the challenges to the heroes. So the hangover thing, though I know they wouldn't have said it in the Filmation cartoon, they certainly would have said it in the DC comic that came around at the same time. So I felt like it was probably okay. But now that you say it, you're right. It's definitely not a fashion thing to say hangover. But yeah, just the drug addict thing and it just, as long as the stakes were high, as long as the drama felt real, then I felt like it was not a complete cheat, but I definitely wasn't going to have them like, God damn, or something, like I knew that wasn't going to be a thing.
Well, I did like that you implied I guess, crackers got skinned.
Yeah. I'll let you use your imagination. You decide what happened. I don't exactly know, but you decide. If you're really twisted, you can say he got skinned, or maybe Anti-He-Man used a little bit of a spell, or he just painted his face. And in Filmation world, things are so wacky that if you paint your face, you look exactly like someone. You decide. It's up to you. But I let that one go without.
I have to comment, Tim, on how when you had told or described Prince Adam or the Filmation version of He-Man, he called him a New England chipper. I laughed out loud when I read that.
And that's also the sort of jaded thing the way we are now, right? Like Keldor is us. He walks into this as us, and hopefully the journey's sort of been, like though you agree kind of with Keldor, you see where he's wrong,
Jumping to issue 5, I gotta point out, I just love your treatment of that savage world, and part of it, it was just beautiful. It was beautiful artwork, and I know you've done your, just looking at it again, you're the right guy for this because you really captured that universe, that world. You nailed it completely. And so part of it, I was going to ask you a little technical geek terms here because I know you know your stuff. Do you consider the later mini comics different than the earlier ones?
It's tough because I interviewed Don Glut, the guy who wrote those, and he lives in Chicago. He's a local guy, and I interviewed him about those original comics. And because there's inconsistencies in the first 3 or 4 books, right? Mm-hmm. Like Tila changes. She starts out as blonde, and she becomes this sort of redhead. And then even like He-Man's relation to Stratos and Man-at-Arms, like all those things change in the course of even those first 4 or 5 books, that first block of sort of almost more like picture books than comics. But but I decided the only, and then DC takes over, right? And then Gary Cohn and Mark Teixeira start doing them, and they're better comics because those guys are comics guys for sure. And but they're different. I think I didn't. If I had the room, I would have counted them all the same up till like the end of the Teixeira run. So up through the sort of introduction of Trapjaw and Ram Man and Many Faces, and the Tale of Tila. I would have considered all of that the same universe, even though consistency-wise, it changes a lot, and relationships change, and they start out with the two swords needing to be tied together to open the door, which they completely abandon later, and then it's just a fun thing about Master Universe. Really, it's just that they were just making it up as they went along. I had no idea, and and when we were kids, we this helped our imagination. Things were inconsistent, and you had to make it work in your head. You had to make your own sort of headcanon. So, but I resolved for this that it would just encompass the first, basically 3 or 4 picture books.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Basically, right up until the time where the red armored god sorceress appears, right? Because the god, that's the biggest change that I've seen. And I've been I've got to say I've been delving into the mini comics quite a lot the last few months. And that you're right on to focus on just those comics.
There's plenty of good stuff in there, but it would have just added, and I would love to have done something with that original mini comic Trapjaw, who was like way scarier and could travel. He's like an interdimensional criminal. He could go from this like flip universe Masters or Eternia, where Castle Grayskull was like a ghosted out. All that stuff is so cool. I certainly could have used it, but I just don't have the space, so.
Right.
And this is a story about He-Man and Skeletor, and that's mostly what it's about.
I have a question specific to issue 5 on page 8, the last panel. I was curious about the futuristic past version of Eternia you did there, because the multiple talent fighters in this comic. That was very interesting.
Yeah, I love that.
In the universe.
Yeah, I mean, that was based on stuff. The original story of the Talon Fighter was that it was this ancient weapon that they had left over, and that, so my idea was to combine all that stuff. I think this was definitely implied by John in his description of the Great Wars, but that this really advanced society had all this sort of stuff that they left over, and that's what Eternia had. So He-Man's Force Dust, the Talon Fighters, all these things were super sophisticated, maybe technology, but maybe with a little bit of some kind of magic. And then when the Great War happened, all that got wrecked, and the bits that were left over were sort of these, Cold War era weapons in this fantasy world, right? There were these, there was sort of the escalation weapons in this sort of, ramped up war. So that was kind of the idea, was to show you, this super advanced intergalactic Eternian society that had all this stuff, and just sort of imply that that's maybe where a lot of that stuff came from. Because to me, it makes sense that, like, this society, there was probably people who just used jetpacks to go to work like that. And then when those were left over, the people who picked them up became the Avian. And
Makes sense.
I think we put in there like I think we did. It was at least mentioned, was like a version of the old He-Man's battle armor, that was maybe some kind of standard, troop thing that they could use, and even maybe that the Cosmic Enforcers were some kind of, like maybe they were the Council of sort of Wisdom or whatever kind of version in this version of the history.
Because Masters of the Universe is basically set in a post-apocalyptic world, so yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Right, basically, yeah. Right. The initial idea was, sort of like Conan is wandering the world that Flash Gordon used to live in. Right? That's kind of the original pitch to some degree.
Yeah.
So,
Good description, yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the way we treated it. What's that?
I was just going to comment on that panel before we switch topics. You mentioned about Zodak's look-alike in that panel as well. That was interesting.
That what?
In page 8, the last panel there, it was a third character back from the idealistic past futuristic version of He-Man there.
Yeah, was that a conscious thing? Because he kind of looks like Hero. He kind of looks, like Hero 2.
Yeah, I mean, but that Hero wasn't part of that original story, right? Like,
Yeah.
that kind of came later. But I also kind of thought, like, maybe on a different continent, they did have Preternia. Like, this was like a massive culture. Like, maybe they had that stuff. But I was trying to stick to stuff directly related to those original mini comics, So like maybe you see a sort of proto Hero and sort of proto King Grayskull kind of in there, but all that stuff came later, and that was so that you could get dinosaur toys, right? Like that wasn't part of the mythology that they started with, which it's totally fine. It evolved and it became different things, but my main interest was, we've been talking so much in this whole thing, is like how did its anti-Eternia happen, and I knew I was going to tie it to this sort of original idea that it was tied to this original, this major war, and this, basically the Great War caused Eternia. It was going to be my treatise from the beginning.
The fact that issue 3 you did the 2000X and kind of left that open, the door open there, in my opinion, because He-Man's still there, all the heroes are back again and everything. And then in this issue 5, you started setting like a standard of, this is the Preternia in a sense. I'm impressed by the fact that you left enough stories on the table that it could be something maybe you could come back to and revisit at some point. Was that an intention, and is that something you would like to do? Because I could definitely, with issue 5, seeing those little glimpses, you could definitely, build some stuff out of that and create some, like the prehistory of leading up to this if you wanted to. Because as fans, we've never got to see a lot of that. This is our first window into that. Is that something you'd be interested in doing if they came back, if the line keeps going forward, or is that something where you're like, it's just fun to visit that and we're good, and you move on from that?
I would write a monthly Savage He-Man book in a second.
To be honest, this issue for me was like, when I heard the voice you used, even just for He-Man in this, I'm just like, oh my God, this is my childhood revisited. This is so freaking cool. So like this whole thing was my bread and butter even more than 2000X, and to see the take on like where his armor could have come from, like you were just talking about, I dug that so much because like it's cool to every hero has that origin where you go back and you're like, this is the reason why he would put this kind of an armor on himself or whatever, or this is why that symbol means this or whatever. And I liked how you and Tom both made a conscious effort to have those nods here. But then if you did an ongoing, sign me up, because at this point I would be all about it, because I love that this is one of those times where it's untouched in some ways. There's 4 issues in the mini comics, and after that, the world's yours, and that would be amazing to read something like that monthly.
Yeah, I mean, and every freelancer learned by the time they've been doing this line up is like, always another miniseries into your series so that you get more work. So yeah, I was definitely trying to. I mean, I was trying to set up everything in this for something else, right? Like, hopefully, this sort of shows that like the strength of Master Universe is such that you could get away with, I think, doing a Filmation miniseries, and you can get away with doing a mini comics miniseries. All that stuff is there,
Nice.
Well,
okay. Cool.
And I just love that it's, again, like the previous issues, it's loaded with references, like just this, even the spelling of Tila with the dash in there is from the early mini comic, and you mentioned the reflecting pool. It was referenced. Is that from the Lake of Mystery poster?
Yeah. Wow, nerd. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. But the idea was really, because in the poster it says, this pool that shows other places, but sometimes it's not right, or it doesn't show the right things, whatever.
Yeah.
So my thinking was that He-Man would have used that as a reference. This is like, I was trying to like, how would you think if you, because he's supposed to be more superstitious, and he's not very technologically versed, and so he would need a reference point of this because he wouldn't understand alternate universes. So, good catch, nerd.
And I really was curious about that page with where he says that that the hidden half of the power sword is gone from its sacred stone tomb. And I'm wondering, is that from Conan? Because I recall that in Conan, the movie, the sword was placed in this stone tomb, and the Conan had to grow up to be strong enough to lift the lid and to take the sword.
That's where it comes from. It comes from
Fantastic.
Conan. It definitely does. Yeah. I mean, and that was, I saw Conan about the same time I got that first mini comic. So, that first movie, even though now I'm not 100% on it, but it was as indelible to me as sort of this, my love of fantasy and sort of sorcery as He-Man was. So, definitely inspired by that. I wanted to play with the idea that, and this is kind of it's a Conan idea for sure, but it's been used in other stuff, which is that He-Man, returned to his village and left this there because he knew that only people that were strong enough on his world were his people. And that's a little bit of that sort of, barbarian Conan sort of thing, like that he would feel that these people were able to, and that's why the girl said, that he would come back and tell them the only reason he was able to go out and do these things was he was able to return to this firm ground and make a stand, right? Like, so, that was definitely all Conan.
Fantastic. And, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the bleeding scar. Tell us about that.
It just sounded like something that would have been done in the old comics, like, and I wanted to play up this idea that we never saw as much from the Great War as was implied, so I wanted that's the one thing I told Tom is like, I want to show what they did to their world in this war, so you see that giant sort of weapon, that big rusting, whatever it is, some kind of mechanical dragon. And then, at some point someone unleashed something so hellish that they basically like broke their earth in half, so I just want to put that all felt like really gritty, like Robert Howard fantasy to me, like this just like, so,
nice.
And the world of the mini comics is pretty small. There's no map. There's nothing, there's no talk of other continents or anything. So I figured it was ripe. Like I could do whatever I want. It was open.
Right. Fantastic.
That's the beauty of it. Yeah.
I was telling you how I've been really digging into the mini comics and your writing and some other people's writings, encouraged me to kind of give myself a project to keep myself sane during this whole virus thing, right? And so I've actually been writing new mini comics that take place before the official mini comics that
Oh,
delve
awesome.
into the Great War and the origins of He-Man and all this stuff. And so this stuff just like, it's just so amazing to read this issue, because
And I think it's just like a testament to the strength of the brand.
Mhm.
They unleashed all these people to just add to this. All they had was toys, the coolest toys ever made, coolest action figures of all time. But that's all they had. They didn't have anything else. So they enlist all these great people, and it's largely comic book people at first, right? They enlist Don Glued, he's a comic book writer, and they enlist Alfredo Alcala, he's a comic book artist, and they enlist Gary Cohn and Mark Texeira, and these guys fill out this world in such a way that like those toys wouldn't have sold the way they did if we hadn't all just been like, what is the deal here? Like those comics.
Right.
I mean, I read comics today because of the mini comics that came with Master Universe. The first comic book I ever got in my entire life came with my He-Man and Battle Cat set. And
Nice.
I immediately had my mom buy me a Spider-Man and a Hulk comic. That was like,
That is so cool.
And there's probably about 3 years there where the only comics I got, because they were hard to find, were Star Comics Master of the Universe, the DC Comics He-Man comics.
Wow. And
Well,
here
did
you
you
are.
ever get your hands on the DC miniseries ones?
The original one,
Yeah.
I love that miniseries. I love it. I mean, I kind of got
Yeah.
to do my sequel with Injustice Master Universe because my first experience with those comics was the Superman crossovers. So, like, I felt like I kind of did it there to some degree, and that was my homage to those. And so if you remember, the original Superman He-Man comics were ads. They were packing in other comics, So, like, I remember I was so excited about more He-Man comics after I read the mini comics that I went to the store and I bought Firestorm and I can't remember what else, maybe like Amethyst or something. And it just because I wanted those He-Man comics that were in there, and I ended up loving Firestorm and Amethyst, what it was. But like I was chasing those He-Man comics, and then he fought Superman, and I was like, holy shit, like this guy is legit. He's fighting who I hadn't read comic stuff, but obviously I knew who Superman was.
I gotta ask you. Okay, since we're heading toward the end here, is that He-Man dead?
Which one?
Yeah, that's the the Savage one.
So my thinking of it was, so he gets thrown into lava, right? But like, he's pretty tough. Last second, he manages to push his force belt on, and he's protected, but he's trapped in lava, so he's taken out. And then the next story of that character, basically him crawling his way through like miles of lava, like a bad mother, to get back. And then you set him up in this new crazy scenario because we took out Skeletor, at least temporarily, but Skeletor like got really close to having the weaponry to bring his people to the world, but he lost the swords. So I mean, you could do so much cool shit. It would be, but we'll see. I don't want to ruin too much, as it kind of sets up in issue 6.
Well, that's what I'm
Awesome.
thinking. If we left that world, I was left thinking, what's going to happen to this world? And that's always the questions that I would have loved to have a follow-up, because I'm curious about all the worlds we've left behind. Like, what is the New Adventures world like now with He-Man dead? What's, the 2000X, that was a big, heavy ending there. And what's that world going to be like? What's the Filmation world going to be like? I think the Filmation world's a little more stable than the other ones, but this one, the power swords are gone.
Right.
And I kept thinking, now that you have this, okay, I mean, I was thinking at first, if He-Man's dead, and Skeletor is relatively down, but he's not out, what's going to happen here?
So much you could do with it, because you don't need the power swords for this guy, right? He doesn't turn into He-Man. He doesn't turn into Prince Adam. He doesn't need the power swords. They're all they are, right? Now they've been in Castle Grayskull. Yeah, you could do. I mean, there's tons. There's so much stuff.
And in the mini comics, once the story was done with the power swords, he was going on just fine with just a battle axe and his shield, right?
And the dagger in his boot. Yeah. Heating nobody. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but that would be the excuse to do more sort of barbarian stuff, right? Like that would be. Now you've kind of got like Castle Grayskull is. I mean, then you don't have to make the story about getting into Castle Grayskull every week, which was great for selling toys. But like, if you had an ongoing fantasy, you could do all kinds of stuff with a wandering He-Man, like on this world that's destroyed. Like, oh man, so much cool shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can never hear
Well,
Rex.
just,
I apologize, Rex.
Since Joe was mentioning how the powers are gone and the key to Grayskull's gone, is Tila now going to take over like a stress goddess role over Grayskull in that world, perhaps? Since she was obviously already in the castle without the get in.
Right, which totally comes from the mini comics because at some point they say that Tila's destiny. I mean, she was. I think it's. I don't want to like reference the wrong book, but she was basically the sorceress in those stories, right? She was in the castle in the second or first one, and then there's that vision of the King of Castle Grayskull, which is like this kind of shadowy guy with a cape and he's kind of got green skin, I think, or something. But she was supposed to be waiting for the person to take over the castle. Like she wasn't the captain of the guard. She wasn't the goddess, right? She was just this woman who was tasked with protecting the castle and basically waiting for her husband to come home, I guess. Just kind of weird tactics, but.
Well, let's be honest. At the time, it was a little sexist. She did kick her. She did kick in her own way.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of played her a little different, But to me, that was just extrapolating what was there. I tried to play as nerd as I am. I was like, I have to like rectify that she was this sort of free-spirited person who was running around on a unicorn, like doing. All of a sudden, she's doing this. Like, well, no, she just accepted this duty, and she was still. That's why I had this scene where she says, she remembered the freedom of running around on her charger and like, this idea that she did this out of a duty because she's, a hero.
That was so well done.
And that was kind of the curious point to me because she clearly has the snake staff in Fiend. So I was kind of wondering if she was de facto the goddess.
Yeah, I think they're different in this story, right? I think the goddess was a different character. Like the goddess was like some kind of, weird guide. Like,
where we were kind of going. Was there an idea of bringing the green one? I call her the green goddess.
I think she's mentioned, right? Or they call her the sorceress. They don't call her the goddess. They don't call her goddess until later. This is my nerd stuff. But they called her the sorceress in the original story. She was called sorceress. But she gives him the weapons, right? She gives him the harness. She gives him the axe. She gives him the shield. And I think she gives him the battle ram too, right? Or is that man arm?
No.
Or Sky. Oh wait.
She gives him the back.
So my thinking was that
in that story.
Yeah, my thinking was sort of like this was when he says he's going to call. We see he mentions two different people. He says he'll call the sorceress and he'll call Tila. They're both. My thinking was, and goddess kind of came about later to separate the green Tila from the bird sorceress, right? But in this, she was called sorceress. I try to stick with the details as they were presented because I am a meticulous nerd about that.
And it shows. Again, this is why you're the right guy for this. Coming up on the hour, I want to hit you up a little bit about what's coming because you left it with a big cliffhanger. We're back to the Anti-Eternia, and it was cool seeing the other characters.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say anti-Manny Faces, anti-Buzzaw. And so heading toward the last issue, what are we going to look forward to?
It's going to be a big fight, obviously. I have no choice but not to have you. I mean, you definitely want to see anti-Buzzaw versus good guy Trapjaw and all that, right?
Yeah.
So we'll do that for sure. Because why wouldn't we? And we'll have Randor on Night Stalker and all that. But the 6 is, I'm really proud of it. It's where you kind of put all the questions that we had into one. So what the question this whole series has been, what does it take to beat a bad He-Man? Does it take a good Skeletor? And is it possible to be that, right? Because that is every time Keldor tries to make a choice that is like for the good, he ends up becoming closer to Skeletor. That's the twist, obviously. So it becomes very much about him as a character. And I'm really happy with that character. I think the sort of he ends up getting to be, like we said, like this sort of modern Master Universe fan. He's like us. He's a little bit jaded. He's a little bit unsure. He's a little bit untrusting. But he's seeing this world unfold in front of him. So it's really it becomes a very much a character study between him and Anti-He-Man. So, and I'm really happy with it. Rob David told me when he read the last script, he got tears in his eyes. So I definitely tried to like make it as sort of for the fans as I could, and I'm even sort of eschewing like I know that some regular comics critics aren't going to get this, but them, and I'm just trying to make like the best He-Man story I can.
That's right. Nice.
Well, I do like the idea. And like I said before, we had circular storytelling. We always end up going back, but the hero went on the journey. He's obviously not the same. We see the difference. And I thought that was a bit harsh, but it does make it cool. He's half a face. Obviously, we all have our theories of where this is kind of going. But I do like that you hit the dichotomy between these two, and part of it, I always wondered when you did the story and all that, and you were kind of coming up with the idea of characters, and you brought it again that you didn't have enough. Do you think it would have been, what kind of story would you have told if you had other characters come in? Like if you had the room to have the other heroes go on this journey, how would it, do you think, I'm trying to say, would it have been different from your original idea if you brought in other characters? Or was this your basic idea of just having these two? Because now I'm pointing out that Keldor's lost everybody in his final say.
Yeah, so no matter what, that would have happened. I had more brought in, Gwildor would have been there. Instead of sort of taking him out early, I would have brought in probably like Attila or two or something like that, depending on the story. I would have had more characters. I was using, when I started this, I studied Crisis on Infinite Earths by Marv and George Perez, and it's something you couldn't do now because it's all over the place and it doesn't have like a sort of focused narrative. Well, no, it does. It doesn't have a focused set of character arcs. It has like all these characters, like everybody doing all these things, and it's awesome, and that's why it works, and that's why superhero comics are awesome. And I would have used that even more of a template. I would have maybe more than one team. I would have people doing different things. I would have loved to have done something involving like, Anti-He-Man is sort of on this one track, and so this team is working on that. But also there's this like, because the Cosmic Enforcers have all been killed, that like the universe is falling apart, so there's this other team sent to do that. And I would have had other narratives that would have done it, which I so wish I could have done, but I just didn't have it.
I think there's absolutely opportunity for there to be another Masters of the Universe series. I mean, DC's been has given us more than one now, and I would love for them to accept a pitch, from you to continue on with something related to Multiverse, or maybe just a new series that explores the mini comics, or that takes off, that's related to, well, not necessarily an ongoing series, but it would be nice to see a series of standalone stories rather than one continuous 50, 100 issue ongoing story,
And that's the thing is that, the new 52, quote unquote, He-Man, the Eternity War Master Universe, is a perfect and contained long form Master Universe. Like it exists, so it doesn't have to be done again. Like they killed it. Right. They did an awesome job. It is a full reimagining of Master Universe. It contains She-Ra. It does everything it needs to do. It ends perfect. So that's the thing, is you don't need to do another one, right? Yeah. So in the future, I mean, I guess my faith in how this would work was different before, like last Saturday when everything went insane. But if you're a fan of Master and you would like to see more of this stuff, you have to let Mattel know, because I don't think they. Right. A lot of this stuff exists because of the passion of the people who work at Mattel. So like Rob loves these. All the people who work on the brand, they love this stuff because they see it as to keep people interested in the various. One of my favorite things about Rob David is his view of He-Man is that it's all real. It all matters. All of it is, someone's He-Man. He loves it all because it's somebody's He-Man. So if you want to see that kind of stuff, you have to tell Mattel. Because they'll tell DC will make things because they have life. But you have to tell Mattel that you want a fantasy comic set in the old miniseries comics. That you have to tell them you want a Filmation comic. Right. Mattel is the ones you got to tell. Don't tell me, because I have no power. I would love to do it. I would sign up in a second. I would do it with Tom Derenick, or I'd do it with Dan Frager, I would do it with Freddie Williams, or I'd do it with all three of them. You got to tell Mattel. Like that's the people who, and they're in a weird position, I'm sure now, because they've got 2 cartoons coming out, and they're working on a film, and so like they're focused. They're very busy with this brand, and they but they've set themselves up smartly to be able to do different versions of He-Man, which is like something that not everybody is able to do, right? Like you can't do multiple versions of some properties because they conflict and then people don't understand it. But there's going to be 2 He-Man cartoons, so it would be no problem for there to be a comic book that is different than the cartoon, or a comic book based on the cartoon, or a prequel to the cartoon, or whatever. But you have to tell them.
What's the best way to do that? Like what's the best form for that? Because there are various like Facebook groups and pages. Like there's the He-Man and the Masters of the Multiverse Facebook page. There are various Masters of the Universe groups. But what's your idea of the best way for fans to communicate this to Mattel?
I mean, Rob has to hear it. That's the one who makes the choices. Yeah. So,
do you have a phone number?
Well, yeah, I'm not gonna. I won't do that.
Yeah.
Rob is on the Facebook group, and Rob is on. Yeah. He's on the He-Man.org, and he's a cool guy who would love to know how you feel about it. And if you set up, like petitions or like a whatever, and like she's the interest in, like we would love to see a mini comics Master Universe miniseries. If enough people say that and he sees it, then he'll do it. Like, and Rob would love more than anything to have the excuse to do that stuff. Like, he has supported so many cool projects that haven't happened, not because of him, but because of everybody else. So, so just if you want things to happen, like he's the guy to direct your passion towards, and know that he is a defender of the brand and loves it as much as you do, and wishes he could do everything you want, and he just needs to know to be able to tell his bosses that, look, the fans are here, they're excited, let's do this,
Nice.
Because I'll do it. I will sign up. Me and Tom Darren could do a fantasy world, mini comics Master Universe series, and it would be killer.
Nice.
One of my last questions. Was there an iteration you wished you could have touched on? Because there's a couple more that I was always curious about. Like, I was wondering if you were going to, you brought it up, the DC universe where we left off, were we going to go back there? Or the other one, my personal one, I wanted to see the classic universe.
Well, I mean, don't count out the new 52 DC one, because I love that one. And as I said, it's a perfect round circle, so don't count it out. But the one I didn't get to do that I would love to do would have been at the end of the Star Comics Master Universe. There was a Future Imperfect story by George Carrigan, which is basically like in the future, there's no He-Man and Skeletor takes over the world. Do you know this one? Does anybody remember this?
Yeah, that was the last 2 issues. Yeah,
it's so well done, and it's really emotional. I mean, the Star Comics Master Universe was, whatever. It was pretty chaotic and not consistently written, and but that arc is awesome. This future where there's basically this sort of it's basically X-Men Days of Future Past, but with Master. I would love to have done something with that, and I actually the last issue had that He-Man in it until the very last minute, but I cut him. So, but yeah, I would have loved to have done something. I also would have loved to have done that knockoff idea I had of doing Platino and
that would be so cool.
Yeah, Fantasy World and Black Star. Well, we couldn't do Black Star because he's a real thing, but knockoff Mexican He-Mans with purple armor and black hair, and I would have loved to have done something with that. I have so much affection for that stuff. As my parents were not super rich when we were kids, my grandma was able to be the one who buys the real He-Mans, but my mom would often buy us knockoff He-Mans. So, my affection for that sort of that stuff is super high. So it would have been hilarious to me for them to show up in a bar full of all the knockoff Master Universe characters. Yeah. That would have been so cool.
I wanted to just say that it would have been great to see the goddess, the green armored sorceress in this issue 5, but I would love to see a reference to either the UK magazines or that new Masters of the WWE universe, those new toys, or the upcoming Origin series.
Yeah, I've been buying I consider the Origin series basically just it's not its own thing. It's sort of it's not yet. It's a survey of like, here's the most iconic versions, right?
Right.
And so it's basically like a little bit of mini comics, a little bit of Filmation, and that's kind of what I consider classics too. I know that there are cards on the back that say consider this a universe, but like to me, classics is just like, here's how everything works so that we can give you more toys, which is great, but that's what it is, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I consider it its own kind of continuity. Like it's just all the things put together in a sort of genius fusion.
Well, I took it because the bios tried to justify everything. The Green Goddess, with Tila, with the Sorceress, and there was talking to Scott Neidlich. There was a story, like a whole big epic thing. That's why I took it as its own continuity. And he did put the mini comics. Yeah. Again, not the best.
I wrote 3 of them, so like I definitely, you know.
That's awesome.
It's more like a remix, it's like you took like all the hot tracks and remixed them into one dance party track. You know what I mean?
Like an ultimate storyline,
which totally works. And I think it's its own sort of. But it would be hard to use because it's not. It'd be hard to do something with it because it's not, by definition, not defined by its uniqueness, right? Like it's not. It has all the other things, and I guess you could almost consider like the crossover He-Man, the one that shows up. You know, the He-Man that shows up in Thundercats, the one that fights. That's kind of That's kind of classic, right?
You know,
like,
he's
the one that has all the story. So like, if you love it all, here he is, and that's why he works the crossover.
I could see them having a final battle, you know, anti-Eternia, He-Man, and Kildor, and them like skipping through different dimensions, you know, like the knockoff multiverse, the classics multiverse, the one of the universes could be like they're suddenly on the floor of the PowerCon convention, and and then
we're all there with our phones taking pictures.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and one of the ideas Rob sent me originally, which was based on that moment, the Skeletor scene in one of his issues, which was that one of the universes is the action figure world, right? Like that you would like, but. And they did it in his comic. They had like a photo of Skeletor toy. But I love that idea. I just I couldn't find a way to make it work dramatically. It was too hard. Because for me, it's always like, well, what is the emotional payoff here? And so I always choose the cheat of what'll make you feel something first. And I didn't have one for that, you know. So
it's too
even if I love
Toy Story,
and you know, there's totally a scenario in this where. You know, we do the whole battle scene, and then we pull back, and it's you playing with the toys. Like that totally could have been a scenario that we did, which we did not do.
That would have been like a Saint Elsewhere.
Yeah, I was about to say Saint Elsewhere. Yeah.
It's
or
the Lego,
like end of Lego movie.
Or Lego movie. Yeah.
Totally.
And that was kind of said, oh, this is toys. This is all young. You draw yourself. A 10-year-old Tim Seeley playing with the toys and. That's the end of the comic book. I would be mad.
It just felt like it wouldn't be. I mean, it's funny, but I don't emotionally. You know, I have to play it like what is your emotional, and if I can't get it, then I have to let it go. But obviously, I love the toys. I've even photos in my basement. You know that I love the toys very much.
Nice.
Well,
Awesome.
Tim, I'd like to say that I really have enjoyed the comic series so far. I'm excited to see what you're going to be doing with the last issue. I have to say, I'm dreading the multiverse collapses with no heat.
But I think you will be very happy. I think everybody will enjoy the last issue because I'm very proud of it. It's very, I don't know, it's consistent with the question asked by the series.
Well, again, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'd like to thank you and, again, asking you, what are you going to be working on? Where can we find you? Again, if we don't like the last issue, where can we haunt you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Hackin. I was doing a bunch of stuff for Valiant, but they shut down on Friday, so I don't know what I'm doing. I got Money Shot from Vault Comics and Vampire the Masquerade from Vault. That's my current stuff, and I teach comics and I teach storyboarding at Columbia College of Chicago. although not right now because everything's shut down. So if you want to see more of those He-Man comics, make sure you let Mattel know that you love it.
Well, if you're not busy, you want to draw comics for us? We'll give you a story idea. Write them.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I may just do it for fun because everything's topsy-turvy, and I have no idea what the hell's going to go on. I mean, this is the first time in my life I've been in a position of not knowing what I'm doing next week. That's not in my life, but in my professional life, this is the first time in 21 years that I've been like, yep, I don't know. Wow. I don't know what's going on next week. So, yeah, not great. But we're all in the same boat, so let's try to enjoy it together and make some cool stuff.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to thank you.
I'd like to thank our special guest, Tim Seeley, for joining us. Again, if you have not read Masters of the Multiverse, go pick it up. It is a great storyline, and we're coming up to the conclusion, which will be next month. Also, I'd like to thank our friends over at He-Man.org. Remember to get your up-to-the-minute Masters of the Universe news. You can always check it out there. PowerCon tickets are still on sale. Pre-orders for their exclusives have been extended. If there is any change to PowerCon dates, we will let you know. But as of now, it is still in August, but subject to change with the world that we live in right now. Until next time, good journey.
This is Renee. I'd like to thank you all for listening. You can subscribe to the Council of the First Ones on your favorite podcast. And for the latest nerd news, be sure to check out Nerds on the Couch on our Facebook page. And good journey.
This is David Clark. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic episode to share with all of you. I want everybody to please visit adultcollector.org for all the latest He-Man and She-Ra news, and also check out the He-Man and the Masters of the Multiverse Facebook page. All right? Good journey.
This is Rex. I would like to give one for having me today and our special guest, Tim, for being on the show. Have a good journey.
And this is Sean, and I want to say thanks to Tim Seeley for dropping by and having a Q&A with us again. And I wanted to throw out there, too, a friend of mine and I have a podcast where we talk about the episodes and the literature of Masters of the Universe as well, called Legends of Grayskull. And we do that once a week. And if you want to check us out, go for it. And also, I'm online at October Sun Art. So, yeah, I'm busy. But anyway, it's good to be back again. Thank you, guys. Good journey. This has been a Nerds on the Couch production in association with AdultCollector.org. This episode of the Council of the First Ones was recorded on March 8th, 2020.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Council of the First Ones. I'm your host, Kelly. Joining me today is my good friend, Renee. How are you doing down in Texas, Renee?
Well, the weather's finally getting warm. I'm looking forward to summer, and summer means PowerCon, so I'm ready.
Oh, so am I. Also joining us is Dave from Adult Collector.
Hi, great to be here.
And we also have Sean joining us.
Hi, great to be back as always, folks.
And today we have a very special guest. He used to be the brand manager for Masters of the Universe Classics, sort of found it, MattyCollector.com, Scott Toy Guru Nightlick. Hi, Scott.
Hello. Hey, Kelly. Hey, guys. How you doing?
Oh, doing great.
Before we jump into the core, I gotta ask you. You know, I want to know a lot about the history and how you got into it. But now, just really quick, you're jumping on YouTube. What got you into doing these YouTube videos?
You know, I think just kind of started with